This is the day when I'm going to share a few more stories, comments, and experiences with you. It's just kind of a fun thing. It's a kind of a chilly day out here for Alabama. It's 46 degrees. I remember, though, on January 2nd, 1985, when I was working at a truck shop, it was 1 below zero here, and I was driving all over town in my capacity as a truck mechanic, getting trucks started and thawing out their air brake lines and all that kind of thing with a bottle torch. And that was kind of annoying because some of them had alcohol in there that was supposed to prevent them from freezing like that, but they were freezing anyway. And the problem was, whenever I was trying to thaw them out with a bottle torch, they would try, some places where there might be alcohol seeping out of them and try to set the truck on fire, and I had to be particular about that. But not that cold out there today, although, it might be coat weather if you're somebody that's not hot natured and all. But I wanted to share a few little things here. I was thinking about some other stories I was talking to with my son. He works up there at an assembly plant doing facilities maintenance and all, and we observe things. Him and my other son, we talk about people that they work with that are just interesting folks, But this particular parts catalog, and a lot of you guys that have been in the business a while, and there are some places I expect they still have parts catalogs like this, and this is actually a whole bunch of catalogs that were put in metal binders that were mounted in a frame so that the parts people could flip from one end to the other and look up the part number and get you the part that they wanted. And then by the time I got to the Ford dealership, there was a microfiche system, where they'd have all these little holders for these microfiche for different year model vehicles and all that, and they used those. And ultimately they went to computers like we did for our shop manuals and all that, because we had real thick shop manuals for a long time too. If you went back a long time though, to find a shop manual from eons ago, you could fit the whole wiring schematic on one page for like a 64 Chevrolet and a lot of vehicles before that. But later on, you would basically have entire books for that and vacuum schematics and all that, and then it wound up being on the PC. The PC started taking hold in about 1992 at the Ford place. And there was another little funny thing. We had this intelligent video learning system. It had these big 33 RPM size laser discs that would have, and it had a little light pen and little boxes on the screen. There were little programs that went with each training session and that kind of stuff. And it was, whenever you first started out, when you would do the course, there was a telephone line that was hooked up to that machine, and it would, over a slow telephone line, it would upload your training records to the Ford Star satellite or whatever, and then they would actually send a printout of how many training courses each technician had done. Well, a couple of funny things happened. First, there's a guy that was another drivability guy they hired to, give me a hand over there in my part of the shop. And they said, go up there and get him signed into that IVLS. And so, and then back in those days, you would put your social security number in, and that's how even when I went to college in the mid-70s, everybody's social security number was posted out there by the door with a grade next to it. They never do something like that nowadays, but. So here, he was putting his social security number in while I watched him, because I was guiding him through this. And as he put his social security number in there, his social security number was the same as mine all the way down to the last number. I was just totally blown away by that. I couldn't believe that I met somebody that had a social security number that the only number that was different was the very last number on it. But anyway, the parts people, I may have mentioned when I was a teenage boy how some of the parts guys, if you went in there, the ones that I knew, the ones that I like to talk to parts people I know. I've always been that way. I don't like talking to a parts guy that I don't know, because you don't know if you're going to get the right stuff or not, especially if they have to order it and then it comes in wrong and they're going to claim you told them to give them bad information and that kind of thing. But if you've got a good parts guy, you're in good shape. And I used to just be able to go in there and just tell them what I wanted off the top of my head. Like, the one that comes to mind was, and I'd say, give me a starter solenoid for a Chevrolet starter. And Obi, the one guy that I knew really well, he just put it on the counter and it always fit. But some of these other people felt like they had to look it up every time, I've talked about that kind of thing before. But that's what the old parts catalog looked like. and it's gone away now. They use computers. If you go into AutoZone or Advanced or something like that, and somebody that knows how to work their way through a computer screen can typically find you the parts you want, you know. This right here, I call this Spark of the Beast, because this is an actual, you can look it up, there's an actual Autolite spark plug that's a 666. That's the number of the plug. Now, I don't remember what it fits. We had to change some of them out, and I just thought that was funny as all get out when I put them on the bench and they had that 666 part number. I know that whenever they came out with the different speed computer processors, and whenever they had one that landed on 666, they called it a 667. You know, for obvious reasons, they didn't want everybody to be spooked because it was a 666, you know, 666 hertz processor. Now, this is the kind of stuff, you know, this picture is not terribly important other than the fact that sometimes we would have these people who would come in there and their seats tracks would be busted and wouldn't work right, like this one is, you know, busted off right there, and it, you know, just gave way. And sometimes we could fix them and sometimes we couldn't. Well, I had this big, huge 300-pound, and boy, this guy was all muscle too. He's a black guy. He's a really nice guy. I really liked him. His name was Bert, and he came in there. He was driving his Oldsmobile, and that Oldsmobile, the seat, I don't know if it's because he was so heavy or whatever, but the seat was completely broke loose from the floor. All the stuff was busted. The seat was just rocking around in the car. He may as well have been sitting on a 5-gallon bucket. And so I said, well, why don't we see if we can fix this for you? So I got a couple pieces of square tubing and made some brackets, and we bolted that seat in there real solidly. Now, you couldn't move the seat. It was always in the same spot, but he was the only one that ever drove the car, and that just changed his whole driving experience, you know. But he became one of my very best graduates, and he went to work at a Toyota dealer and did really good work over there. And one day he was on the way home from lunch, and he was probably driving his motorcycle a little too fast, and somebody, you know, couldn't see him, pulled out, and he popped over the hill and crashed into the side of the truck, and that was the end of him. But he was one of my favorite guys. I just really thought the world of that guy. It was painful for him to leave that way. But there was another couple of guys I put at that same dealership, and I ran into this, you know, whenever you're training people and trying to get them put to work, it can be a painful thing in and of itself. And I sent this one guy to work at that same dealership. It was after or before, I can't remember if it was before or after Bert was there. And so he goes to that dealership, and he was a pretty doggone good mechanic. He did some good work there while he was in the program, but I did a co-op thing where he's supposed to come to class in the morning and go to work in the afternoon. And he would go over there, and he got to the point to where he stopped coming to class, and then he got to the point to where he was late going to work, and some days he'd miss work and all that. And I was thinking, good grief, what a mess. And the service manager called and said, what should I do with this guy? I says, fire him, get rid of him. I'm probably going to flunk him out of here because he's just not doing anything like he's supposed to. And so I says, but I do have another guy that I need a place that I can send up there, and he can work there too, you know, I mean, in this other guy's place after you let him go. And so the second guy that I sent was a lot better. His attendance was good, his work was good, his attitude was good, he was real even-tempered and all that. He was a young guy, you know, but he had a lot of potential. And so he went up there, and it turned out that the first guy that was being so irresponsible, he was really good at this. He went in there whining and wheedling and begging the service manager not to let him go, and the service manager kept him. And then this other guy that was a pretty good student with his attendance and work ethic and all went to work there. And because of the fact that the first guy was getting away with dragging in late and being irresponsible, he learned that really fast, and he turned into a sorry slug that wasn't showing up for work and was irresponsible and all that. And I asked him about that, and I said, why in the world did you fall apart like you did after you went over there? And he says, well, they didn't do anything to him for being late and not coming into work, so I just figured I could get away with it too. You know, that's his 1 Corinthians 15:33, bad company corrupts good morals, you know. And I told the service manager, I said, you caused this. If you'd have let that first guy go like I told you to, the second guy would not have gone bad. You know, but as it turned out, I wound up, you know, with that. You know, it's always annoying whenever you bend over backwards to go out of your way to send somebody somewhere to get them put to work, and then they either don't show up for the interview, or they show up for the interview and they tell them they're coming to work, and then they never show up for the first day of work, and it makes you look bad, you know. It's, you know, I had a lot of other people that I placed that did really good work, are still out there today, still making really good money. But everybody's got to take their own work ethic with them. It's kind of like that performance, attitude, integrity, and dependability slide that I put up last week. All right, this was a truck that was sitting out there at the country store where I used to eat lunch every day before it burned down. But this pickup truck wasn't out damaged in that fire because it was in a different area of that compound out there where the store was. My dad drove a truck like this. Whenever he came back from Korea, as soon as he came back from Korea, the first thing he did was he paid $50 for a truck, almost exactly like this one. Now, one of the reasons I know that was because when we got out of the vehicle over there one day and he was coming to eat with him, we walked by where that truck was parked, and I said, didn't you have a truck like this? He says, yeah, I had a truck just like that, only that's not the original headlights, and he gave me some more fine little pointers. If I'm not mistaken, this is a 30 model, and the 29 model was slightly different. I actually think Dad's was a 29, and I believe this is a 1930 model here. But anyway, that truck is, still somewhere sitting in a barn, this was a funny little thing I came up with. This guy got a t-shirt made that said hashtag Ruin Nation, But I told one of the guys that was a student in there, he had a 2005 or 6 model Power Stroke diesel 6-liter. And he was driving that thing as a regular ride. And he came in there one day, and I said, this coolant bottle is leaking, and you need to replace this coolant bottle, because if you don't, it's going to push a bunch of the coolant out, it's going to overheat. And I said, they got a coolant bottle right over here at the parts store for $48. Well, he didn't want to spend the $48 that day, so he figured he'd just drive it a while longer. Next thing you know, because of this coolant bottle that was busted, all the coolant went away, or enough of it went away to where this thing overheated, and he wound up with needing an $18,000 engine. I think that truck wound up getting sold for scrap, or somebody bought it for pennies on the dollar that, they had a motor they could put in it or something. But I told him, I said, I'm going to get a hat to put on your head that says Ruin Nation, because you ruined this thing, man. I kept telling you needed to replace that. And he said, don't do that to me, It was kind of funny how he reacted to that. But that same student, one day, whenever I was gone to lunch, I got some video footage of him off of the college camera out there stealing the battery out of one of the trainer cars. And I went over and looked, and there was some other battery in there that wasn't the one that had been in there. And so when I went and pulled the video footage from the security guy, I said, look at there, there's that guy stealing that battery out of the car. I made him bring the battery back. And the guy he gave the battery to got really angry about it, but that was, some people, you just don't know what they're going to do. There was another day that I was demonstrating this timing light. I pulled it out of the top of a file drawer in the tool room. There was a file cabinet in the tool room, and I stored some of the tools in. And I opened that file drawer, and I took that timing light out, and I hooked it up, and I pulled the spout connector on this Ford and showed them how it moved dropped the timing back to the 10-degree base setting, and you could turn the knob on the back of this time. It was a nice little timing light. And within 2 days, one of those students, I don't know which one it was, took that timing light and just, left with it. And it's one of the things where you kind of had the idea of, who got it, but you're not sure, But anyway, this right here is kind of funny to me, how people will trap tools, and then they'll let the car leave with the tools still there. This was one of my Facebook buddies posted this, and he said that the vehicle came in for some kind of work, and when he opened the hood, whoever had worked on it last had just left this ratchet in there because they had left it trapped. Apparently they got it trapped and they didn't want to go to the trouble to get it out of there, or didn't know what to do to get it out of there, and they just left it in there. Here's another one we saw where there was a wrench, a rusty old wrench that had been there a long time that somebody trapped and couldn't get out of there, and they just figured they'd give up the wrench rather than taking it out. It's just sort of embarrassing there. Of course, there's these other things, when you've got these black sockets that are not very shiny or nothing, if you drop one of those under a hood somewhere, you probably ain't never going to see it again. You can look under the car and it's not anywhere under there. One time I had a socket that came off of a little chrome socket that came off of a tool that I was holding, and it skittered across the floor and went under a bench where there was a bunch of junk. And I went under there, it's 5/16 3/8 drive socket. I went under there and I dug every last little bit of the junk out from under that bench, and I never did find that socket. It makes you wonder, like when you're working on a carburetor and you drop a spring or a ball or something, and you're watching it all the way to the floor so you can see where it goes, and then when it hits the floor, it looks like it does a vanishing act where you don't even see where it went, let alone the fact that like it sunk into the concrete or went into another dimension about the time it hit the floor. And that's why it was always a good idea, to put something like some cloth down there or something, so if you drop something like that, it wouldn't bounce very far, or you'd be able to see it easily. But there's all kinds of methods to that. But one way or another, people give up tools like that whenever they do that. I had a pair of black handle Craftsman pliers that I really liked a lot. Wrote my name on them, or Richard, in with an engraver. And those darn black handle pliers, they were not chrome, but they had black handles. And you know how when you're working on a vehicle and you get your pliers, you lay them over here on the fender liner on the inside, up there about inside the hood. I don't know how many times I've almost lost them. One time I did let them go out of there, laying under the hood, and another mechanic had them in his hand one day over there. I said, where'd you get them? He said, I found them under the hood of a car. I said, well, that's my pliers. See, my name's on there. You need to give me them pliers back. But after that, I said, well, I'm not going to leave these under the hood anymore. And whenever I would get through doing whatever I was doing with them, I'd drop them on the floor behind me, because I'd rather drop them on the floor and just pick them off the floor than have them ride out from under the hood of the car. This is a funny little meme that I made, where people that don't know much will think that these are the lug nuts. This, in 1971 or 2, Ford had some hubcaps that you had to pop off that looked like they had lug nuts that were actually part of the hubcap. And invariably, when you see a hubcap that's got lug nut, imprinted in it, where they look that real, you're going to find one where somebody has put a socket on there and busted it out of there thinking they were taking the wheel off when they really were supposed to pop the hubcap off. And I made that funny little meme right there. You can read what it says when the guy you hired, obviously didn't know as much as you thought he did. But everybody that's ever pulled a wrench has made an embarrassing mistake at some point. I'm not the one that did this. I seemed like I saw this on a car that came in to have work done on it. I didn't even have a student that did this, but it was funny that you can look at that and you can figure out what happened. It's not that big of a deal there. All right, I had often seen this when I pull up to the drive-through. I don't know how many times I see this. My wife was a drive-through teller at the bank for 25 years, and she said she saw it all the time. People had to open the door to do business because their power window wouldn't work. And I was thinking, if you were semi-retired and you could set yourself up a shop where you could just have some fun, it wouldn't be a bad idea to set up a shop that did nothing but power windows. I bet you probably have more business than you think if you did nothing but power windows. If your power window's inoperative or they got a bad regulator, bring it to me and we'll take care of it. I had noticed that some of these General Motors cars in the early 2000s, the 200s, would go to the dealership to get their power windows fixed, and every time they had a power window fixed, it was like $400 for parts and labor at the dealer. And that was a ton of money, like $1,600, because they said about the time they got one fixed, another one would go out. And one time there was somebody that came on a Buick that had a bad power window regulator, and I looked online and found a power window regulator for that Buick for $18. Now, it didn't come with a motor, but it was brand new and it was perfect the way it worked. But it just wasn't all that difficult to change. Now, some power windows are a little more aggravating to work on than others. On some of the Fords, you got to drill out rivets, and I like to put the rivets back. A lot of other people just replace them with bolts. But bolts have a tendency to work loose. So if you're going to put bolts in there, you probably ought to put a lock, blue Loctite on them or something like that. I wouldn't put red Loctite on there because it's too tough. But some of you guys might remember the Fords that would have if you're going to replace the power window motor, they would have the 3 places that corresponded on the inside of the door panel. You pull the door panel trim off, and you see these 3 center punch places that was lined up with where the bolts were that held the regulator. And you could take a drill, pretty good size drill, like a, I don't know, it would need to be like a 7/16 drill, or maybe a 1/2 inch, or maybe a 9/16 drill bit. You drill in there, and if you drilled them 3 center punch places, you would be looking straight at those 5/16 head bolts that held that motor in there. And so once you drill in 3 holes, you put a socket in there, get the bolts out, pull the motor out, pop another one back in there, put the bolts back in. And there was this guy that was helping me at the dealership, and he was, we had one of those that we had to replace. He goes, how in the world are we going to get to those bolts without pulling this thing all the way down? I said, I think I can probably just drill some holes that we can get through there with. He said, how are you going to know where to drill them? I said, I can just estimate, you know, but I could see the little dimples where the center punch places were, but he wasn't, you know, astute enough to notice that. And I just popped 3 holes in that thing, and when he looked at it, every single one of them was perfectly lined up. His eyes were this big around. That was funny as all get out. There was another guy I was training, I may have mentioned before, his name was Keith, young boy, probably 18 years old. He was shadowing me around all day for a while because he's still in high school, as part of some program. And he came over there, and he was watching everything I did, trying to learn everything. And I wasn't always thinking about so that I could explain what I was doing. You know, sometimes you just get so focused on the job. And I went over there, and the tempos had this recall where there was, they said, if the engine controller has fins on the side of it, it needs to be replaced because it's one of the ones that has the program that they were. But if it's smooth on the side and doesn't have, you know, cooling fins, then you'll know that one has already been replaced. That was the way you could tell. Feel of it, if it had cooling fins on it, all of those tempos and that couple of year models needed an engine controller put on it. So I was walking out there looking at the work order, and it was one of those that had the symptom they were talking about for that engine controller, whatever it was. And so I got down on the floor and I reached under the dash and I felt of the engine controller, and I felt the cooling fins on it, and I said, yeah, this one here is going to have an engine controller. And he threw his hands up in there and he goes, oh great, he feels of the engine controller and says we're going to have to replace it. You know, then I had to explain to him, well, I'm feeling for cooling fins, but to him it was like a magic act where you're holding the work order up to your head and you can tell him what, you know, what's wrong with it. Anyway, the power window thing would be fun. It's kind of like having a shop that just does brakes and nothing else, you know. You could probably do pretty good with a shop like that because everybody needs brakes, you know. All right, now this right here is what happens when you're telling the students, do not use a 12-point socket on one of these bolts like this. It's really, really tight. I don't like 12-point sockets anyway. Whenever I was ordering student tool sets, when they had a grant that was paying for their tools, I had a tool list, and I would always specify to give me 6-point sockets and 12-point wrenches. You know, because 6-point wrenches are a little bit annoying, because especially if you're in a tight spot under there. And so some of the times these knot-headed tool people would get that crossed up, and I'd wind up with 12-point sockets and 6-point wrenches. That irritated me too. But whenever, a lot of times the student will put a socket on here, and they may not even get the socket on there perfectly straight, and then they'll pull the trigger on an impact wrench or whatever, and that darn thing will jit around and dance on that, and then they come and say, I can't get this bolt out of here, and you know, they're kind of wanting you to go in there and perform some kind of a miracle. Well, sometimes if it was one of those that is rusted down a size, you know, from a 15 millimeter where a 15 doesn't quite fit it, but it started out as a 15, but it's kind of rusted out some, you could, you know, it's rusted down to where it's a kind of a smaller size. You can take a 9/16 6-point and drive on that thing, and you can get it out of there like that. Valve grinding compound is something else you can put on it. The diesel department guy used to have them throw the socket in some sand, an oily socket in some sand, and drive it up on there. I mean, there's all kind of ways you can do it. I didn't like that oily socket sand business, but you do what you got to when you're in every situation. Anyway, I could usually get that out using tricks and stuff, but sometimes when they would round it off to the point where it was so perfectly round, you'd have to perform some kind of a extraordinary miracle, you know, to get the thing out of there. And they always, it's real easy for them to screw it up really, really bad and then call you and want you to come take care of it. This right here was on a Mercedes that the guy that used to be the president of the college where I was, and this guy loves doing his own work. He likes working on stuff, and he likes tough jobs, and he's a really unusual guy. He wears a suit. He's a martial arts expert in Aikido and all that. He's like a 3rd-degree sensei or something like that. But he is a really interesting character because he's got a PhD in math, but he's also extremely solid when it comes to doing mechanic work. He drives a Porsche Boxster, and I think one of the things he enjoys doing more than anything else is changing the spark plugs in that Porsche Boxster. You know how much fun that is. Well, he bought a Mercedes that he was going to fix up to drive as a 2nd or 3rd car or whatever. He's got several cars, and this one here, this steering wheel bolt, he needed to go in there and replace the turn signal switch. And this steering wheel Allen, somebody had rounded it out before he ever even got to it. And so he sent me a message and he says, what can I do to get this out of here? And I said, I would take a Torx bit that was a size bigger with a bunch of valve grinding compound, and I would drive it in there with a hammer, real solid, because a Torx bit will spin an Allen wrench better than an Allen will. It's got a bit more of a bite to it if you've got a good one. So he went and bought that one. I think it was a T50, I'm not sure. He drove it in there. Furthermore, this bolt's got this bevel, which, you're basically having to break all that loose and start it turning. And he had sprayed some deep creep on it and stuff like that. And he used an impact wrench and he spun that thing out of there. And he said, I'm a great believer in an impact wrench now. Well, an impact wrench uses inertia to do the work. I used to have these high school students that were football players. They had great big muscles, bigger than mine. And I would say, break this bolt loose. They put a wrench on this bolt and their veins would be bulging and they'd be pulling on it, trying to break it loose. They were trying to do it with brute strength. And I'd say, wait a minute, let me see that. And I'd put my finger on it and I'd slap the wrench and break it loose. And they were just totally astonished by that. But I would tell them, I said, the answer to it is a hit's worth more than a pull. That's why the impact wrench works, because the inertia is working for you, right? Now, I've talked about these cars that sit around that are a mystery to me. This car right here is sitting on a sort of an empty lot on a street over here close to where my uncle lives. And I've been noticing this little Kia for weeks and weeks. It never moves. It's still sitting there. You might notice there's no license plate on it. And that is just the wackiest thing I've ever seen. This is not an old car, but it has been sitting there for a very long time, like it's abandoned. And I don't know why it's there, who left it there, what's ever going to happen to it. But and that's not even in a really good part of town either over here. But you might notice that this thing's been sitting there and nobody has bothered it. Nobody has broke the glass out. Nobody has, pried the trunk and the hood open to see what was in it. Nobody has stole the wheels and put it on blocks and all that like they did in Stuart Little with his little car. I mean, there's nobody typically strips vehicles that are abandoned in this part of the country, which I think that means that I live in a really good town here. But there's a lot of other places where you park a car. There's a town not 30 miles from here where if this car is parked on an empty lot, it would be stripped before the sun went down. Or before the sun came up if you let it get dark and all. But anyway, that was just very interesting to me. It's a mystery that I'll probably never solve. This right here was a gas station in the town that I'm living in right now in 1928. In August of 1928. And it is so cool. These gas pumps right here, if you know how they worked, they would basically fill that glass thing up all the way up here. It was marked for gallons. That one there is full up to about right there if you look at it. And what they would do is, with it full up like that, it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 10 gallons in there. And so whenever you were putting the gas in there, it would go down from 1, 2, 3, however many gallons you put in there. Then when you got through, you had a little lever down here, and you would pump that lever and fill that back up so that it would be up on that 0 gallon mark, so that whenever you get, it would gravity feed into the car. That's the old style. It's not really even a gas pump, it's a gas dispenser, I guess is what you'd say. But there they are in August 1928 using one of those. This is a Texaco truck here that apparently had delivered some more gas to them and all that. That was a pure and wonderful time, but it was near the close of the Great Depression when that happened. Anyway, I thought that was a cool picture of an old gas station there. This right here is disgusting whenever you've got a set of these sockets that's not really the best name brand. A lot of people say, well, Harbor Freight sockets will do that, but metal fatigue will cause one of these sockets to shatter. And there's a if sockets are hard, they're the malleable steel on these black sockets is typically for you to use them on an impact wrench because they are less likely to shatter. Well, this was a black socket, but it wasn't malleable steel. And it wasn't, it looks like it's made for an impact wrench, but because of the way it broke, it was obviously, it didn't have the right metal composition and metallurgy used to build it. And so when you've got a socket and it's the only one you've got that's perfect for that job and it breaks like that, that's disgusting. One time I was doing a brake job at my dad's shop way back in the 70s, and I don't know where he was, but I was out there working by myself. And I needed a 7/16 line wrench, which is the same as an 11 millimeter. And so I drove to the Napa store and I bought a line wrench that was a New Britain. You've probably heard of that brand, New Britain. It was a New Britain line wrench, and I don't remember what I paid for it. I mean, I think I may have paid $7 or $8 for it back in those days. It was 40 years ago or more. I got that thing. It was a nice looking wrench, and it was a good brand. That New Britain was a good brand. I got out there, and the first time I put that thing on that brake line, when I went to break that, brake line loose with that line wrench I had bought, it broke, kind of like this did. It was a flaw in the wrench. And that just irritated the stuffings out of me, so I had to leave and go back to town, which was about 5 miles from where I was, and buy another wrench that was a different brand. I mean, all they had was some off-market brand. I've still got the one I bought to replace that one, and it never gave any trouble. As a matter of fact, I've actually bent it into heated it with a torch and bent it so I could get in some of the lines better after that. But it's really annoying when you buy a tool that you feel like is going to be a really good tool, and the first time you use it, it breaks. On another note, I bought my dad one time. One of the things I just really used to love to do when my dad was still running a shop is buy him tools. Now, he started out in the early 60s, and he bought some really good tools. He had some of the tools he had were made by Sioux, S-I-O-U-X. I don't know if you ever bought any of those tools, but they're really expensive and they're really, really, really good. And so I had bought him a snap-on long slugger air hammer for $100 off the tool truck. I said, I'm going to give Daddy this for Christmas, And so I gave it to him, and the next time I saw him, after he'd been using it for 2 or 3 weeks, he said, I don't like this. I said, what do you mean you don't like it? He says, the Sioux air hammer that I've had for 30 years works better than this one. And so I went out there and checked it out at his shop, and sure enough, the Sioux air hammer did hit a whole lot harder. And so I took that snap-on air hammer to the dealership, and I told the snap-on guy, I said, this air hammer is not working right. And it wasn't that it was a sorry air hammer, it was just that something was wrong with it out of the box. And so I says, now what are you going to do for me an air hammer while you're getting this one repaired? And he said, well, I've got a loaner air hammer that I'll let you use, and it was a Chicago pneumatic, an old scratched up, and I've still got that in my toolbox out here too, old scratched up Chicago pneumatic. And so I said, well, I'll use that one until you get this snap-on one back. So I took that one, and that was the hardest hitting air hammer I've ever owned. I've never seen one that worked any better than that old beat up Chicago pneumatic that he gave me for a loaner. And when he came back with this other long slugger, I says, you can have that snap-on. I'm going to keep this Chicago pneumatic if you'll let me. And he says, well, that'll be fine with me, because he was going to sell that, I guess, somebody else. But there's a friend of mine that called me yesterday. That's a truck mechanic. Big old guy, wears glasses, big beard, looks like a grizzly bear. I've known him for a very long time. He was working at the Ford place when I went to work there in 1985. And it was in June of that year that I went to work there. But anyway, we got to be really good friends. We went to lunch every day, and every now and then he'll give me a call. But this guy was a great big bear of a guy. And I'm telling you, he had hands like the Incredible Hulk. His hands were like that wide, and he was just real thick. He wasn't hardly any taller than I am, but he looked like a refrigerator with a head, And so what was funny to me was he was so fast. He could move faster than anybody I'd ever seen. I used to go out there whenever he was looking at the other direction in the parts room, and he had a lot of hair on his chest, and I would just pluck one of the hairs off his chest, and I'd try to get out of the way before he hit me 7 times, He was that quick, And one day there was this snap-on guy that was a hothead that came in there, and that snap-on guy was getting ready to sell this young boy that my friend knew was not going to stay in the business, this big heavy-set buddy of mine. And he told this boy, he says, look, he's trying to get you to go into debt for $3,000 to buy a little box of tools that you could buy probably for, $200 at Sears. And he said, you're not going to stay in this business anyway because you ain't cut out for this kind of work and you're just not that good at it. And he says, you need to think long and hard before you spend $3,000 on this little teeny box of snap-on tools, because you know how many tools you can get for snap-on for $3,000. You're going to wind up with enough you can carry out of there and put in the, put it in the back seat of your car and not even, Anyway, the point is, So the Snap-on man came back in there for that kid to sign the papers, and the kid says, Philip talked me out of signing these papers, so I'm not going to buy these tools because I just don't really think I need to go $3,000 in debt. And this hot-headed Snap-on man tried to kick my buddy, the guy with the glasses and the beard and all that. I mean, he literally tried to kick him. And the guy that he tried to kick, the truck mechanic that I was talking about, was so fast that he grabbed the Snap-on man's foot when he tried to kick him, and the Snap-on man's other foot went out from under him, and he fell on his rear end out there on his greasy shop floor. And the truck mechanic let go of his foot and said, "Don't kick me." He didn't know my buddy very well, or he wouldn't have tried to kick him, because that guy, I mean, he was a gunslinger. You don't want ever a gunfight he had, I imagine, because he had the fastest hands I've ever seen to be a guy as big as he was. Anyway, this is another guy, this guy Sam, that works at a local place where I like to get some of my, get my oil changed, and I like to hang out down there. Sometimes when they got a problem troubleshooting the vehicle, I go down there and help them. But Sam drives a hearse, which Sam's got a unique sense of humor. You see, he's got this Grim Reaper stuff on the back and all. And I don't know where he got this or how he landed the deal, but it's pretty funny. I went to college with a guy when I first, going community or junior college or whatever, right after I got out of high school. And he's the same one that said, I wish my car would do that when these muscle cars would boil their tires going around the McDonald's. But he was talking about, he went to work as a mortician. He basically was getting into that line of work. And I went by the funeral home one night just to visit him because I knew he was working night shift over there. And he said, "Boy, howdy, let me show you this new hearse we've got." And I said, "Oh man." And I told him, I said, "I don't realize I thought of having to ride in one of these." And he said, "Don't worry, you will." And then he said, "Look at these caskets in here. Look at this casket showroom. This is the one I want." I'm thinking, it's kind of morbid, but that guy still works at a funeral home. That's what he's done for his entire life. And I think he got his first funeral home job in 1977 or something like that. And he's been working there ever since. This right here, look at these used Ford vehicles. That was Mr. Majestic. This is Gone in 60 Seconds movie. Look at his Mustang. That Mustang right there. Now the cool thing about that car is that was one Mustang. They used one Mustang to make that entire 45-minute car chase in Gone in 60 Seconds, 1974. That was the old second, 1974 movie. See, this thing's already jumped over and it's bounced around here, and the guy's already smoking the tires, getting ready to take off again. Now this right here is the Dukes of Hazzard. Now the Dukes of Hazzard, I heard John Schneider was the blonde-haired guy on Dukes of Hazzard, and he said that they had 75 of these 69 Dodge Chargers on hand, and he said that they used up 10 of them every episode, and they were constantly, they had a whole crew of body men working on these Dodge Chargers all the time, fixing them up, these General Lee Dodge Chargers. And I noticed, I said, and I used to kid around with some of the people that didn't really like Ford. I said, of course I can talk for or against any brand if I want to, just playing devil's advocate or whatever. But I told him, I said, this guy used one Mustang in a 45-minute car chase, but they used 10 Chargers every time in every episode. That Mustang, incidentally, on that Gone in 60 Seconds, 1974, that Mustang still runs. And there was a guy that bought it, and he says as long as you're driving it real hard, it doesn't overheat, but you just drive it normally. It's all beat up, just like you saw it right there. And that car still runs, and the guy still drives it, which is totally amazing when you think about everything it went through. If you hadn't seen that Gone in 60 Seconds, 1974, you can pull up the car chase from the 1974 Gone in 60 Seconds movie, 45 minutes long. They destroyed 93 cars and one garbage truck. And that Halicki guy that made that movie owned every one of the vehicles that was destroyed. And I thought that was a kind of a cool movie. But that first video that I showed on there of the truck, that was Mr. Majestic. That was a Charles Bronson movie, and Ford used that for an ad. And they said it was a used 1968 Ford pickup, and it just jumped all over the place and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. Now, I was mistaken for a cop wearing his uniform. You've seen me in his uniform before. But one day I was leaving the store out there, the grocery store, and I went walking across the parking lot, and this guy fell down beside me, just walking along next to me for whatever reason. And he says, "Have y'all been busy lately?" And I says, Well, somewhat. I mean, I haven't been as busy as I'd like to be. And he says, well, hadn't there been a lot of fender benders up and down the bypass? I said, well, yeah, but that'd be body shop folks. That ain't got nothing to do with me. This guy thought I was a police officer. And that wasn't the only time I was mistaken for a police officer. One day, I was driving a cop car, a black one. I don't even remember what city it was from. But I was doing some work on it, and I pulled over behind this 18-wheeler that was sitting there because I needed to get out of the way so I could turn and go through the mall. And he got out of his car and came and said, or got out of his truck and came and says, you going to give me a ticket if I make a U-turn here? I said, I don't care what you do, man. I'm just working on this car. Because, see, I look like a cop. They wouldn't read the patches. I mean, the patches, one of them with an ASC patch, he's over here said Ford, and they had all these little funky things. The service manager at that time would like for us to have patches all over our shirts. And, you know, it would tell where I worked, and it said what my name was, and it had certifications on my other sleeve and all that. But people would just look at the image of somebody in a uniform that color, and they would assume that I was some kind of a cop. And I never tried to get anybody to believe I was a cop. Now, one day, my buddy's wife dropped him off, and I was working on a cop car, and I fell in behind her when she was going over to get on another road, and it was like 30-mile-an-hour speed zone. She was going 45. She terrified, you know, whenever I pulled up next to her over there. You know, she was sitting there with her hands on the wheel, you know, her eyes real big, and I blew the horn and waved at her, and she, you know, got mad at me because she thought she was about to get pulled over, and it was just me. Anyway, in this uniform, I was mistaken as a fireman. This little kid, it was right after 9/11, I was standing there in this waiting room, and these two kids were there, and their mom says, now y'all stay here, I'm going to go over here and get our food and come back. So she, you know, the waiting room was a different building than the place where the food was coming from. So when she walked out of there, that little girl looked at me and said, why do you have to look after us? I said, who said I have to look after you? I said, she didn't tell y'all, you know, that I was the boss. And her little brother says, you're in charge because you're the fireman. I thought that was strange. But I was wearing a red shirt, and that was the college colors at the time when I had just become an instructor at the college over. My mother took that picture one day whenever she had her camera with me and she went over for a visit. On this uniform was the last one I wore, and I still got a uniform like this. I was mistaken for a paramedic wearing this one right here because people wouldn't pay attention to what the patches said. They would just assume that I was a paramedic. It amazes me how somebody's got a shirt, you know, with patches on it. It's a particular color. The color of the shirt will give them the idea that you're somebody you're not. And I never tried to convince anybody I was anything except what I was, you know. My friend Ricky has got a whole bunch of cars out here, and I sort of turned that into a watercolor. But I was amazed at it. That's an old AMC, and that right there is a Studebaker of something. There's a Volkswagen bus. I ought to know what that is, but I don't. That's a Nash Rambler, you know, an old Nash, and that's an old Chevy, and that's an old Ford, 51 Ford 10.5 truck or something. I don't remember what that one is down there, but he collects things. He's a collector. He collects, and I don't know if he'll ever do anything with any of those cars, but he's got his iron lined up out there. I thought that was really cool. This was the guys that I taught in El Paso, Texas. I was talking about that a while back when that on one of my other videos where somebody had, one of these guys had left a fuse out, and the dealership charged him $1,700, you know, to, when he should have checked the fuse to start with. They did a whole bunch of troubleshooting. When they finally worked their way back to the fuse, they had so much time in it, they wanted to, you know, charge the government, you know, the border patrol $1,700 for, you know, a bunch of work that wasn't necessary because they should have checked the fuse before they did anything else. You know, a lot of times you can just bypass something like that. But that's the only time I ever spoke behind a podium that said Homeland Security, you know. And I'm sure there's a lot of other people that have spoke standing behind one, but I thought that was a pretty cool gig there. Whenever scroll type compressors, I used to like to take these compressors apart. These scroll type compressors don't take a whole lot of energy to run, but they tend to fail this way. They got seals around the end of this scroll, and those seals fail, and then parts come apart. And I mean, it just, you can see this thing right here really went through a meat grinder on the inside of it. And those scroll type compressors, when they do that, they make a mess everywhere, you know, in the system. They put metal all throughout it, and you got to put filters and screens everywhere unless you want to, you know, even though you flush it out. The first time I ever saw a compressor that died that I was working on one. And I didn't know a whole lot about air conditioning then, but I did know how to pull the air out and charge it up. But it was one of those old V compressors on an old Chrysler. It came apart, so I bought another compressor from the parts store, put it on there. It lasted almost no time for it, knocking and making a bunch of racket and all that kind of hogwash. And so I called the guy at the parts store. He said, well, what did you do to get the metal out of there? So he said, that metal that came out of the compressor that originally came apart filled that system up. So what I did with that one was, he says, if you got something that will cut that oil that's in there, you can get that other. So I actually took the lines loose from each component, and I would pour them full of denatured alcohol. Actually, it was Delco D-Clean, which was some purple stuff in a can. It was mostly denatured alcohol, but it was made for flushing brakes back in the day. They don't sell it anymore. You can probably look it up. It came in a steel can. We had a bunch of it. Anyway, I'd pour all that stuff in there, and then I would put a hose going into a white bucket, and I would blow that alcohol out of there. And I did that several times until there was no more particles and crud coming out of there. And I did that to the evaporator, I did it to the lines, I did it to the condenser. And when the smoke cleared, I had pretty well flushed that system out. I put another compressor on it, put the right amount of oil and refrigerant in it, pull the air out of it, and the air conditioner worked just really good. There's ways to do stuff if you just, think about it. I was doing fleet maintenance at the time, so I had very little to lose, This right here is an evaporator trainer that was made by Consulab. I thought it was a really cool deal. And what they did was, in this right here is supposed to represent the gas tank, and there's a halogen light bulb in there. And so basically you could operate your purge valve, and you could have test points here so that whenever you were testing this system, you could make leaks. You could make a leak with these two right here, and then you could basically turn on your purge valve over, it would go and you could turn on your vent control and let it close the vent and turn on this. You could also turn on this headlamp bulb, and it would start heating up this airtight chamber here, and you'd see the voltage change on the, that's the gas cap there, on the pressure sensor, wherever in the sound field. I think it was on this thing here. And so that pressure sensor voltage would change as this heated up. It was kind of demonstrating the natural vacuum leak detection thing. But that was a cool training board. I bought that at college not long before I, bought it with college money not long before I retired, and I guess it's still over there. Now this right here was the Ford thing I was talking about. I saw this at the training center down in Tallahassee, where they were showing you testing the center electrode resistance, and they said it was supposed to have less than 8,000 ohms is what as I remember. But the long and the short of it is, it said, JB19 check spark plug resistance. And I told you about how the Champion spark plug guy, when I put that in a Motor Age article, said that was the wrong way to check spark plugs. But Champion spark plugs, if you measure the resistance, are just all over the place. There may be 2,000 to 17,000 ohms within one set. Well, I got things to do, and I'll release this video on Monday, but I do it on Friday, and Friday's my busy day, and so I'm going to let you guys go. I really appreciate you stopping by, and I hope you enjoyed what I had to ramble about today.